Hello and welcome to DB Systel UK protects over half a petabyte of data using N2WS and AWS. Just a few housekeeping items as we get started. One, when you join today's webinar, you selected to either join by phone or computer audio. If for any reason you're having trouble with your audio and you'd like to change your selection, you can do that right in the audio pane in your control panel. Also in that control panel, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters, and you can type those questions into the question pane you'll see on that panel. We'll collect all those questions and we'll address them after the presentation during the QA session. And if for any reason we're unable to get to your question, we'll plan on responding to each of you personally through email. The deck is also going to be made available through SlideShare, along with the recording of the webinar about 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of this presentation. So make sure to keep an eye on your email for that. So my name is Henry Axelrod. I'm a partner solution architect at Amazon Web Services, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for today's webinar. In addition to my introductory presentation on backup and restore on AWS, today you'll also hear from Sebastian Strab, a senior system engineer at N2WS, and Stuart Lupton, a cloud architect at DB Systel UK. With that, let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So as I mentioned, the first thing we're going to start talking about is backup and restore on AWS. So to get started, I wanted to let everyone know a little bit about the AWS Global Infrastructure. The AWS infrastructure is made up of geographical regions that are spread throughout the world. Currently, we have 21 different geographical regions. And within those regions, we have clusters of data centers. Each region is made up of is an isolated location, and within those regions, we have availability zones. And those availability zones can be made up of a single data center or multiple data centers, but they're at least one building, and they're separated from faults on each other. So in addition to the 21 geographical regions and 66 availability zones, we've also announced plans for 4 additional regions and 12 additional availability zones. So what are some of the core components when we think of storage solutions on AWS? We think of mainly 3 core components. The first are AWS services. Now, when we think of the AWS services, AWS has many storage services, but also has many other services part of the AWS service offerings. AWS currently has over 165 different unique services, and these services together provide customers with agility, scalability, durability, and cloud-like economics to help with any of their business needs. In addition to the services that AWS offers, AWS technology partners are able to integrate either their existing on-premises solutions or build new solutions on top of AWS, utilizing the AWS services to add additional advanced functionality. And lastly, consulting partners kind of complete the puzzle by utilizing both AWS services as well as technology partner solutions to help customers both deploy and manage their end-to-end business solutions. So I wanted to take a quick look at some of the AWS storage services. This is, of course, not a comprehensive list of all the storage services that AWS offers, but just to give you an idea of the high-level areas of storage services that AWS offers. So AWS offers storage services in file, block, and object. Um, within file, we have services like Amazon EFS and Amazon FSX, both for Windows and for Lustre. Within block services, we have services like Amazon Elastic Block Store or Amazon EBS that provides block level storage to instances, uh, as well as Instant Store. In addition, with those block services, uh, AWS offers services like EBS snapshots, which I think we'll be talking a little bit more about today. As well as services that are often associated with backup, like our object services with Amazon S3 as well as Amazon Glacier. In addition to the various storage services, AWS also offers various data transfer options so that customers have many options in order to get data to and from AWS. So one of the things that AWS offers is various different storage classes within the Amazon S3 offering. This helps customers with data at different life cycles within their data life. So everything from active data with our standard and intelligent tiering storage class to infrequently accessed data with storage classes like our standard infrequently accessed and our one zone infrequently accessed class. Finally, as data needs to be archived, we offer services and storage classes like Amazon S3 Glacier and the recently released Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive. As I mentioned earlier with the availability zones, all the Amazon S3 and Amazon S3 Glacier storage classes are protected across 3 or more availability zones to provide the 11 nines of durability that are offered as part of those storage classes, with the exception of the one zone storage class that's designed to be in a single availability zone. And that's designed for customers who want to store things like secondary or replaceable copies of data at a lower price point. So what are some of the common challenges that we see with customers with backup solutions on premises? Well, one of the things is that there's a lot of manual aspects in managing those environments, and especially as it comes to storage and being able to scale up the storage to be able to meet the ever increasing demands on premises, having to acquire both disk, tape, and other resources to be able to manage the backups. We also see that there's a high cost in being able to build and maintain those on-premises solutions and storage hardware. Finally, with ever increasing compliance requirements, it's especially as it relates to backups, we're finding it difficult for customers to be able to meet those requirements based on on-premises solutions. So what are some of the benefits that we see with customers that do backups on AWS? Well, first of all, customers are able to get integrated solutions. As I mentioned earlier, AWS offers a wide variety of services, which include storage and other services that customers are able to take advantage of on the AWS platform. It also provides a very secure environment, both from a security and compliance perspective. Data is encrypted, and encryption services are offered. Various encryption services are offered on the AWS platform to help encrypt data, both at transit and in rest. It's also very easy for customers both to get started and to manage in an ongoing fashion. Customers are able to provision services like storage services directly from the AWS console without the need to buy and maintain hardware. AWS also offers a highly scalable solution with services like Amazon S3 that provides virtually unlimited storage for customers. Finally, customers are on the AWS platform are only paying for what they use, which helps create a very low-cost solution for customers. So, what are some of the benefits of APN storage competency partners? Well, as I mentioned, partners or technology partners help create advanced functionality. And one of the other things that they do is they actually help customers deploy solutions in a easier and quicker manner, right? Using familiar interfaces and really bring together all the services that AWS utilizes. Some of the advanced functionality that some partners bring are things like incremental backups and policy-based backups, as well as help customers really be able to identify and rapidly recover their data. And overall, this helps create a very cost-effective solution for customers. So lastly, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware. As I mentioned, security is very important to AWS, and in addition to the various security services, AWS works with many different certification and assurance programs. This is just a subset of those that are listed. If you're interested in learning more about those certifications, you can go on the AWS website where we have more information on that. But just to give you an idea, AWS works with certifications like ISO 27717 and 27718 for cloud privacy and cloud security, as well as SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. And customers can be compliant with HIPAA and PCI, as well as GDPR on the AWS platform. Governmental customers can also be in compliance with ITAR and FedRAMP requirements. With that, I'm going to now turn it over to Sebastian, who's going to tell you a bit more about the N2WS solution.
All right, this is where I'm going to tag in. Thank you so much for the lead in, Henry. All right, so let's talk a little bit about N2WS backup and recovery. As we already heard from Henry, AWS really provides us with the backbone, the structure to store data in the cloud. All right, so we usually like to say it's the promise of the cloud delivered. So what you're seeing here on the left side of the screen, that's what AWS gives you. It's the Amazon EBS snapshots. They're very fast, very efficient. Then also very powerful APIs and CLI. Very durable storage. I mean, S3, it's very hard to even think about a way of destroying S3. And AWS Lambda scripting gives you the ability to automate certain processes. And then, of course, the regions and availability zones, as we heard, they're all over the globe. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. So what you're seeing here on the right side of the screen, that's really how we complete that picture, that disaster recovery picture. Because N2WS backup and recovery gives you the ability to also back up the infrastructure that's behind your EC2 instances, such as your VPC settings. Then the ability to archive backups into true S3 buckets. And you're never going to lose that granularity of file and folder level recovery. Then everything is wrapped into extensive auditing, reporting, and alerts, And then, of course, also really important if you're backing up, especially databases, you want that application consistent backup. And last but certainly not least, everything is wrapped into a simple and easy to learn graphical user interface. I always joke around, I can teach somebody N2WS backup and recovery in about 30 minutes. All right, so we usually refer to ourselves as the giant recovery button. We provide automated policies and schedules. So once you're in the cloud, the whole paradigm shift of going into the cloud really hits you, because no longer do you have to perform backups only once a day or at nighttime in off hours. Theoretically, you could back up far more frequently. And with N2WS, you have that flexibility. You could perform backups of your mission critical applications throughout the day, even during the busy business hours, let's say every 5 minutes. So if something really terrible does happen, I just simply dial back 5 minutes and I'm back in business. And then past the business hours, well, I can probably then fall back on every 6 hours, every 12 hours, or maybe just at midnight, I'm going to perform one last backup. What we also provide is cross-region, cross-account disaster recovery. Remember the days yonder when Iron Mountain came by at the end of the day and picked up tapes for safekeeping somewhere in a mountain, somewhere in a bunker underground? That's completely gone. I can move my entire infrastructure, my entire mission critical content from one region to another, from one continent to another in just a couple mouse clicks. It's so easy now. And then with the VPC cloning, this is what I was talking about earlier, because if you're backing up the content, there's not two ways about it. Your content, of course, is very important, but having the content of your servers, your database servers, your file servers, and then missing out the infrastructure, VPC settings, subnet settings, routing tables, security groups, that's not going to do me much good. Just to compare that to an on-prem recovery, that would be like me saying, I'm going to give you the server back, but no cables, no routers, no switches, no connectivity whatsoever. That's not going to do me much good. So that's really where that capturing of VPC settings comes in really handy as well. Then archive snapshots to Amazon S3 buckets. So you have the snapshots, and we did talk about that already. They're very fast, very efficient. But, well, do all of my backups have to be in snapshots? Because there are much cheaper priced tiering is available in AWS, and that's exactly what that allows you to do. And that allows you to stay compliant for a far lesser cost. I can retain data for really as long as I need to, instead of having to say, well, do we really need to keep this data? Because now I have that option to retain the data for as long as we think we might need it. And then, of course, also the ability to start and stop instances on demand. Just recently, about 2 months ago or so, I saw a really interesting article, and it was about cloud waste to hit over $14 billion in 2019. It's about wasted cloud spending, which comes from idle resources. Most non-production resources are only used during a 40-hour work week, and they don't need to be running 24/7. That means for the other 128 hours of the week, which is, what, 76%, you're burning IT budget for absolutely no good reason. So that is what N2WS allows you to do. It allows you to take control of those instances that really don't need to be running all the time. So cover all your databases, which almost reminds me of that really old meme, all your base belong to us. So all your databases are covered. We do support right out of the box MySQL, MongoDB, Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server Exchange, Active Directory, SharePoint, and many, many more. It really makes no difference if we are talking Windows-based or if we are talking Linux-based. And I already mentioned that application consistency. Because when you're taking backups off your databases, you don't want to have a crash consistent backup. You really want to have the ability to perform an application consistent backup, which then once you recover will allow you to immediately start using those databases again. You don't want to have some consistency check running for several hours. And NoSQL, no problem for us, because we also back up and recover DynamoDB tables and tags. And as mentioned, we also support Cassandra and MongoDB as well. So to give you a little bit of overview about the N2WS architecture. So this is how it works. You just simply deploy an N2WS backup and recovery server as just another EC2 instance in your environment. And as a side note, we're extremely lean. It only requires a T2 small instance. And through that, we then have access to the account in which the N2WS server is installed in, and we can then perform backups of all the resources in that account. And ultimately, we can then also archive the data into true S3 buckets. But there is more to it. Once again, it's on the right side of the screen, because under the hood, we also have the option then to access additional AWS accounts. So it really makes no difference how many more AWS accounts you have, perhaps for safekeeping, perhaps to have a backup vault. We then also have the ability to access those and perform backups of that data as well, and then also archive the data into S3 as well. All right, well, demo time. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and a demo is even better, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to show you the live product. So there we go. I just went ahead and shared my screen, and by now you're probably seeing my web browser with the AWS Marketplace, because that's how you would get a hold of N2WS backup and recovery. It's very easy. It's just a virtual appliance, which you can simply pick up in the AWS Marketplace. The entire spin-up process of the appliance itself only takes about 60 seconds. So once it's spun up, this is what it looks like. It's just a web portal. I'm already logged into the web portal, and I know it looks a little bit confusing. I remember the first time I saw a solution, but trust me, you will be an expert at this very, very quickly, because it really is that simple. It's very intuitive. Very important is the backup monitor. That's your single pane of glass. That's going to allow you to see all of the backups you've performed across all different regions and across all different AWS accounts. So you're no longer limited by just seeing one single slice of the pie and what are we backing up in one region. I get to see everything. Next to that, you have policies and schedules, and don't worry, I'm not going to bore you by showing you how to create schedule. But let's take a look at the policies, because that's really where we define what we want to back up. And as you can see, I already have a few policies in place. And when I create a new policy, I can easily assign a policy to an AWS account, and I can also assign a policy to an N2WS backup and recovery user or groups of users. And by the way, we also support identity providers, which means if you have a single sign-on solution which speaks SAML, it's going to work just fine here. So this two-tiered approach gives me the ability then to assign exactly what each user within my backup solution is allowed to do. If you have a backup admin who's going to perform some development work over the weekend, and you want to give him access to only his resources and nothing else, that's exactly what this is for. You define your retention period and also your schedule, detailed as you wish. You're still missing something. What exactly do I want to back up? Well, once again, it's really just easy. It's a graphical user interface. Here I already have a policy which backs up most of my Windows instances. This one backs up most of my Linux instances. And then here on the right side of the screen, you choose backup targets. So here I get to choose which resources I'd like to back up. N2WS has the ability to back up entire instances. That's really the easy button, because it allows you to choose an instance, and it works like your brain. Because when you're thinking servers, I would bet you're thinking the entire entity. Hardly anybody thinks particular volumes. And that's exactly how we work. We're going to back up the instance, plus all the metadata, plus all of the infrastructure settings. So I don't have to start wondering which volumes do I need and how do I reattach all of these volumes. But if you really wanted to do this to yourself, you do have that option. So you can also pick only particular volumes, perhaps volumes that are unattached, data at rest, that sort of thing. You can use N2WS to back up RDS databases, all of the different flavors there are, Aurora clusters, Redshift clusters, DynamoDB tables. If you want to back up an instance, it's very simple. It all works the same across the different services. You can then browse for the different regions in a graphical user interface and see the different resources, and then it's just point and click. You just choose what you'd like to back up. You click Add Selected. That's almost it. Now we're going to start performing backups of that data into the same region where the data is currently residing, which is pretty good, but it doesn't really give you that disaster recovery capability, because what if there is a region outage? Or what if I lose access to my AWS account, heaven forbid? So let me show you how that's configured. And that's over here on the DR, right here with the DR button. So here I have the option to say, well, every time you perform a backup, I also want you to perform a disaster recovery backup into another region. Remember that example with Iron Mountain? I can literally move my data across continents just simply with a mouse click. Well, why stop there? Let's also create a backup in Asia and in South America. And at this point, really only an earth-ending event is going to bring down my infrastructure. And at that point, I think we're all just looking for food and shelter. Now, down here, I also have the option to go for the ultimate in peace of mind. This is going to give me the ability to perform a cross-account disaster recovery. So even if I lose access to my primary AWS account, I do have a backup vault. I can then spin up the data from that account and in that account. So that's how we perform backups. But all the backups in the world aren't going to do you much good if it's very difficult and time-consuming to get the data back into play. I think we all can agree on that. So let me show you how that works, how to recover the data. So Backup Monitor, that's my single pane of glass. And now I can just simply go for one of my backups. So I'm going to click on the Recover button. Up here, I get the choice. I can choose to recover the data to the same region where the data originally came from, or my disaster recovery region. I also get to choose to recover the data into a different AWS account. Perhaps we're migrating from one account to another, and I also get the choice to restore the data from a different account. Remember, because we did configure disaster recovery availability in another backup account. That's the backup vault. And then over here, I have 3 different recover modes. First one is instance recovery. This is going to allow me to recover the instance exactly as it was at the point of backup. So if somebody intentionally or unintentionally deletes that instance, this will allow me to bring back that instance exactly as it was. Let me show you how this works. So down here, that's the metadata I was talking about. So we know exactly which VPC, which subnet, which IP address, and which security groups were assigned, and of course also the instance type. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, click on Recover Instance, it's going to do just that. It's going to recover the instance exactly as it was at the point of the backup. But you can change your mind. So I could change it into a different subnet, different IP address, I assign different security groups to it, or maybe even change the instance type altogether. And if I perform a recovery of the data into a different region or into a different account, remember when we were talking earlier about the infrastructure? You spend a lot of time on creating your VPC settings, your subnet settings, your routing tables, your security groups. Well, this button is going to take care of that. So this then allows me to actually clone that entire configuration into another region or into another account altogether. I also have the option to fall back on volumes-only recovery. So in this case, we're going to assume the instance still exists, and I get to choose which volume I want to recover. You can also make changes to this configuration. So if you want to change the type or the IOPS, you can attach it to a different instance or attach it to the original instance and just simply replace the original volume. So this allows me to hot swap a volume into a running system. And last but not least, you never lose that granularity. So even though we use that block storage, the snapshots, and Henry already told us about this, and they're very fast. There's no kidding about this. I never lose that granularity to go right into the backup and pick and choose files and folders. So when I click on Explore, that's going to bring up that File Explorer right here in my web portal, and I can then start browsing through the data and pick and choose the data that I actually need. This just happens to be a Windows server, but it doesn't matter at all. N2WS Backup and Recovery is completely OS agnostic. Doesn't care if it's Windows, doesn't care if it's Linux, doesn't even care if the data is encrypted, because we do have the ability to manage all of the encryption keys for you on the back end. So it's really completely transparent for the end user. A lot of information. Now, let's actually perform a recovery, because after all, that's really our claim to fame. We talked a lot about Windows, so let's use Linux now. And it's not all or nothing. I can actually pick and choose which instance I want to recover. So I'm going to do an instance recovery for my Linux instance right here. My instance is still up and running, so I don't want to cause an IP conflict. So let me blank this so that AWS is allowed to assign a new IP address to it. Down here is my recover instance button. If I click this, it's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? You want to recover this entire instance right in front of everybody? Sure, what's the worst that can happen, right? Let's find out. All right, there we go. Operation succeeded and one instance was launched. Now, if we're quick enough, I can actually show you what that looks like in my EC2 console. There it is. That instance is now being recovered, and it's still in pending. It's probably going to stay like that for another 20, 25 seconds. And you see that button here? That's still yellow, and the moment that button turns green because of a feature that Amazon calls a lazy loading feature, that instance will be fully functional and operational. It means I can immediately start hitting it with SQL transactions. I'm going to time out. I'm not going to get any error messages. And there was no puzzling. I didn't have to figure out which volumes did I need for this and how do I reassemble all of this. It's really just point and click, and my entire instance is back up and running. So that's really how fast you can recover an entire mission-critical instance within seconds. Saving money. This is usually the part where people say, okay, backup and recovery, you guys got that figured out. There's no doubt about that. But how can you save me money? Because the backups are stored in snapshots, and they're very fast, but there are cheaper tiers for that storage. So that's what the S3 repositories are about. Here we can define which S3 buckets N2WS is allowed to use. And then under policies, I also have the option to define my copy to S3. So here in my case, I'm performing daily backups, and I'm going to keep 3 of them for my rapid recovery. You saw that earlier on the slides as well. And then my copy to S3, well, I'm going to keep 14 days of backups in my S3. Of course, you can raise this to weeks, months, or even years. That's where the savings comes in, because S3 is much cheaper than the snapshots, up to 60%. So that makes a huge difference. Then sometimes I do get customers who ask, well, isn't this going to be more difficult, the recovery now, because it's archived, right? Not at all. Nothing changes. The recovery process is exactly the same. So when I click on recovery, instead of choosing from snapshot, you're just going to recover from S3 repository. And then you can also choose to recover it into any region. So there's no pre-planning required for this. I can literally perform a recovery at a drop of a hat. If my management says, we want to move everything from North Virginia to Frankfurt, I can actually do that. And that's also where that VPC capturing and cloning comes in really handy, because I don't have that infrastructure in Frankfurt, so how do I get it there? Well, that's the information that I was talking about earlier. So all of these different settings, we capture them, we monitor them. You know how it goes. Somebody makes a change on a security group, it might go unnoticed, undocumented. Well, no longer, because N2WS actually monitors for changes. So if somebody says, I want the file server to be exactly in the state it was in on March 6th, I can do you one better. Not only can I bring back the contents from March 6th, but I can also bring back the entire infrastructure configuration as well. I can then clone this into, in our crazy example, Frankfurt, into a different account, clone VPC, and that entire process only takes about 30 seconds. You can even take this entire configuration and export it into a CloudFormation template. So that's really how easy it is. Everything you've seen me do is pretty manual, right? I choose instances. Well, you can also automate this entire process because we do have custom tags for that. So we have a custom tag called CPM Backup and also Resource Control. So when you launch a new instance, you can immediately make sure that N2WS will start backing up the content and also start turning off and turning back on those instances when you deem them necessary. And all of that is just simply done through tagging. There's far more to this, but I don't want to start boring you with this. So what I'm going to do now is I'll stop sharing my screen, and we're going to go back to the slides again, because there is far more information that you also want to hear about Deutsche Bahn as well. All right, so that's my demo time slide. So N2WS is used by AWS builders worldwide. And what you're seeing here, this is Cloudar, TechRacer, University of Notre Dame, and of course, let's not forget Deutsche Bahn as well. Some information, some numbers. So N2WS actually has 4,000 plus AWS accounts that we are protecting. Over 100,000 EC2 instances. And another number which I always found really interesting is 13 petabytes of content that N2WS Backup and Recovery protects in the AWS cloud. To give you an example is what a petabyte is. If you're like me, you probably can't even fathom what that means. I know my wife takes a gazillion pictures, and each of them takes up about 3 to 4 megabytes. All photos on Facebook combined are 1.5 petabytes. So this shows you that N2WS is a major player when it comes to backup services. All right, well, you're probably wondering at this point, so how do I get started with all of this? Well, this all works through the AWS Marketplace. As I showed you, it's just a virtual appliance. You just simply go to the Marketplace, type in N2WS, and the very first hit in that search is going to take you to our trial. There is a fully functional 30-day trial available, and you can actually see everything I just showed you in your own environment. All right, well, now I'm going to hand it off to Stuart. There you go, Stuart. Let us know a little bit about DB.
Thank you, Sebastian. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today about how we at DB Systel manage our backups with using the Veeam N2WS product. Let me just send my slide forward. So before we go into that, I would like to give you first an overview of DB Systel UK, who we are. And I'll try to keep this section brief, and then we'll move on to talk about why it's important to protect your data within the cloud, how we as an organization managed backups when we moved our first workloads into the cloud and the shortfalls to that solution, and then what eventually led us to choose a Veeam N2WS as a partner. And then finally, I'm going to take you through an overview of our solution and how we leverage the N2WS product today to not only protect our customer data, but to also deliver additional values, as Sebastian was mentioning about the data tiering and the cost savings. So we are a managed service provider and consultancy organization. We're based in Doncaster in the UK, and we're part of the Deutsche Bahn group, which is more frequently known as DB. We have in the DB group 310,000 employees worldwide, and we're the #1 in Europe for regional passenger transport, rail freight transport, and rail infrastructure. And we also operate globally within the air and ocean freight and contract logistics space. The chances are, if you traveled within Europe by bus or train, you'll have used one of our services. So as a managed service provider, we offer a wide range of services, and this is only a small subset of those. And I'm not going to cover each one today, but if I can draw your attention to the top row. So these 3 services, when combined together, is our customer journey into the cloud. So the cloud readiness and TCO analysis, this enables our customers wishing to migrate workloads into the cloud to understand the current systems and the dependencies between those systems, what is suitable for migration to the cloud, and on the flip side, sometimes what is not suitable to go into the cloud. And the TCO element enables us to forecast the cost of placing a workload into the cloud. We also have a proven migration toolset and methodology, and this enables us to perform a cross-infrastructure machine conversion. And for this, we use a real-time continuous block level replication into a small staging area within AWS. This allows us to replicate Windows, Linux workloads from physical, virtual, or even other cloud-based infrastructures into AWS, while automating all of the hypervisor OS configuration changes, boot process, OS activation. We also offer consultancy in the migration space around refactoring and re-architecting solutions to make use of cloud native services. And finally, our cloud managed services, They couple our infrastructure expertise with our extensive cloud management, UK-based support, which allow our customers to realize their wish to go into the cloud, but also focus on their business themselves. So what we're doing is that we're allowing customers to reduce the financial risk of migrating into the cloud with the accurate data-driven TCO. We're accelerating journey into the cloud without ever compromising on security and impact to business. And once our customers are in the cloud, we're then assisting optimizing workloads. So this can be simply suggesting a resizing of an instance based on gathered historic metrics, or utilizing new AWS products and services. We also provide our customers with a real-time view of what they're spending within the cloud, again, allowing the customers to focus on what's important to them, the business. So now you know a little bit more about us and what the services we offer. Let's look at why we should be performing backups of our data within the cloud. So security and compliance is a shared responsibility model between AWS and the customer. And the purpose of this shared responsibility model is to clearly define the boundary of responsibility between AWS as a cloud provider and ourselves as the consumer of the service. So AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. So this is the hardware, the software, networking and facilities that run AWS cloud services. And we as the customer are responsible for the data we place within the cloud. And that's really important for this topic, is we understand how we enable backup and recovery for our data should a problem occur. So when you operate within the cloud, the same threats exist as working on premise. And one example here can be human error. So this is where someone accidentally terminates an instance, and it's really important that in this use case we're able to recover that workload. Another example can be availability zone failure. Thankfully this doesn't happen too often, but a failure of an availability zone or a region can occur, and you often cannot afford the downtime to wait until that region is recovered. So it's important we consider backing up to another region or another account. And one that's really important for us is the compliance and data security. So we have various accreditations and standards that we comply to, such as the ISO 27001, and also ourselves and our customers are subject to regular audits. So it's really important that we have a strong solution to protect our data within the cloud, and that we can show proof of it to our auditors when we're required to do so. So a little walk down memory lane, and I'm sure some of you will gasp on this next slide, but this is how we used to manage backups for our first workloads within the cloud. So we manage backups by the use of a number of scripts. So we're talking multiple CloudWatch events, which would in turn trigger a Lambda function. The first one would scan the account, identify all volumes, be it EC2 or RDS, and would perform an EBS snapshot. Then we would run subsequent scripts which would manage the snapshot deletion based on the required retention period. And finally, for our transactional workloads, where we required this application consistency backup and log truncation, we would have to rely on other OS native tools or additional scripts. This meant restores were very slow and clunky. An example could be if a customer requested a single file to be restored, we would have to restore an entire volume, mount that to a donor server, take the file off, present that to the customer, and then go ahead and clear down that restored volume. And the whole solution became very difficult to manage at scale. We had to duplicate all these scripts between different accounts and customize based on the slight niche requirements of each customer. Finally, we had no single management plane to review our backups, nor could we do any centralized reporting. So the illustration on this side, Sebastian's already talked about, and I mean, for me, it's a really good representation of the Veeam N2WS product and how it leverages the AWS snapshot technologies, which we know are super reliable and efficient, but while adding the missing puzzle pieces, such as the application consistent backups and the file level recovery. So after a short proof of concept of this tool, we're able to back up a number of workloads across multiple accounts and regions. We were able to perform application consistent backups, single file level restores, all through a single user interface, as you've seen. We're able to quickly determine that this is the product that met all our requirements. So let's share with you now how we use N2WS today to back up and protect our customer data. So here you can see a simplified overview of our architecture. In the top middle, you will see our N2WS backup recovery instance. So this resides in a central backup account where access is very restricted. So the sole purpose of this account is to perform backups of workloads across all our estate. So snapshots are performed using the AWS CLI against each customer account. So this is an API call that's made from the backup recovery instance to perform a specific task, such as a backup or restore. We also use additional AWS services such as AWS config for tagging compliance, and I'll go over that in the next slide. Server notification service for backup reporting and error handling, and this links in very closely with our ITSM suite. And IAM roles are used to provide the permissions required to perform this cross-account backup and recovery. And the IAM role policies used there are built with the most restrictive permission set, so only permissions specific to the tasks required are granted. So automated backup by tagging. So what do I mean by this? So I'll give an example. One of the things we commonly see on the field is people investing a lot of time and money and effort building a backup solution for only potentially a backup admin to not include a certain server or a certain volume. It's generally not noticed until it's too late, until a customer request comes in for a backup, for a restore, sorry. So what we do at DB Systel is we automate all backups by the use of a tag. So a tag in AWS is a key value pair that can be allocated to a resource. It's generally used to identify a resource's purpose, like a development or production server, or its owner. But what we do is we use it for tags. So we use the tag CPM backup, and this is assigned to all resources. And the value of this tag dictates the backup policy that is to be applied to that resource. So we automate compliance of these tags using AWS config to detect non-compliance. So what I mean by non-compliance is a resource without a defined CPM backup tag. If this is detected, an SNS topic will send an alert to our ITSM suite where we will perform automated remediation. So any resource not requiring a backup can still opt out using the tag no backup, but this method provides us with a manual opt-out rather than an opt-in, and it ensures we can back up 100% of our work resources within any given account. So for our customers' transactional workloads, we're now able to provide application consistent backups in the form of an EBS snapshot. So this is made possible by the use of a thin backup agent. This is placed on the backup target, and this agent enables a direct communication between the backup recovery instance and the backup target OS. So if we take the example illustrated here, we have a SQL backup in account N. And when a backup is initiated, either manually or by the schedule, the backup agent will communicate to the SQL VSS writers within the operating system of the backup target and request a freeze of IO operations. So it puts that server into a ready state. So once this freeze is complete, the backup recovery instance will then perform a snapshot as usual. And once this snapshot is complete, the agent will then send instructions back to the VSS writer to thaw or to resume IO operations. And this results in an application consistent snapshot rather than the native crash consistent. And we're also able to build in custom pre and post snapshot scripts for protecting other workloads. So S3 tiering, as Sebastian mentioned, it's quite a new feature to the product, but what this does is it allows us to provide our customers with the option to tier snapshots and make use of that more cost-effective storage, such as S3. A lot of our customers have long backup retention, some 7 or even 10 years. So and EBS snapshots by design are forever incremental. So a snapshot set spanning 10 years can definitely be cost prohibitive for our customers. So what we do to tier to S3, we create an S3 bucket within the customer account. We define this as a repository within the console. And then we simply configure within the backup policy how often we wish to tier to S3 and what retention should be placed on that backup. So again, if we take the illustration on the slide here as an example, let's say this customer requires a daily backup which should be retained for a year. So to achieve this, we can configure a daily snapshot with a retention of 7 days and a tiering policy to tier every 7th backup to S3 with a retention of a year. And how this will look is after the 7th backup is made, a temporary instance labeled the S3 worker will be spawned in the customer's account. And the role of this worker is to take that 7th EBS snapshot, convert it into the native veeam.vbr file format, and then move it into S3. Once this operation is completed, the S3 worker is terminated. And what this does is it allows our customers to make use of EBS snapshots for their quick daily restore. So in this example, 7 days of fast EBS recovery, and then S3 for the longer retention. So backups for the backups that don't need such quick restore times. We also have the ability to link this repository and tiered backups to our on-premise Veeam backup replication suite. This gives us the ability to restore workloads between cloud and on-premise. Okay, so summarize here. So what our backup solution is now giving us is the backup guarantee. So 100% of data within our customer's account is backed up. And this is supported by our automated compliancy solution. The fast data recovery, so where previously restores took minutes, we're now able to restore files within seconds. So if you take the example I explained earlier about the process to restore a single file, we can now do this within one single click using the restore user interface. Flexible backup policies, we're able to offer customers backup policies and retentions to suit their requirements. We're also able to back up at 1 minute increments, whereas previously we were limited to 5 minute increments. Disaster recovery, we're able to easily back up the data to another region or to another account, which enables us to protect the data against regional failure or account compromise. The cost savings made possible by tiering backups to S3, making use of that more cost-effective storage, and also with the lifecycle management of backups. Backup retention is aligned to the customer requirements, so we have no more unnecessary cost spent on non-required or orphan snapshots. And last but certainly not least, we have the central management and reporting, which not only enables our operational staff to be more efficient, being able to manage backups through a single pane, we're also able to meet confidently any audit requirements. So before I hand over back to Henry, my contact details are shown here. Please reach out if you would like to discuss any of the services I mentioned that we at Systel UK can provide. Of course, reach out to Veeam and N2WS, and I'm sure they'll put you in contact as well. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hand back over to Henry now for a Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for that great presentation and all that information. So we have just a few minutes for some quick Q&A. So I'm just going to get us kicked off. I see one question, which I'll at least one question that I can answer very quickly, which is about will we have access to the webinar afterwards? And the answer is yes. Within 2 to 3 days, you should be receiving a link which will have slide share as well as the presentation. So the first question for N2WS is N2WS available in all AWS regions? And if so, how can I access it?
Oh, sure, yeah. So it's available in all the different regions, and as I mentioned, it's just simply something you deploy through the AWS Marketplace. Pretty simple. Just go to the Marketplace, type in N2WS in the search bar. It's going to show you the different editions that we have, also that free trial I was talking about. And down there's a drop-down where you can choose all of the different regions that AWS supports. You just simply pick your region, click on Continue, and then it deploys it.
Great, excellent, Sebastian. There's another question here for you that, the question is regards to failure of N2WS server. So since N2WS, of course, protects the whole environment of instances, there's a question, what happens if the N2WS server itself fails?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. So N2WS Backup and Recovery is not a software as a service solution. And the big advantage here is that you're not reliant on some service being up and running in order to perform backups and restores. And of course, most importantly, you're not sharing this with any other customers. It's yours. It belongs to you. It's in your environment. It's another EC2 instance. And then you're right. The logical next step is, well, yeah, but what happens if that instance fails? Then, gosh, my backup solution is gone. How do I get it back? It's actually very simple. N2WS has the ability to back up itself and also perform disaster recovery backups of itself into other regions, into other accounts. So let's say worst case scenario happens. The entire region goes down and I lose the region that my backup solution is installed in. All you would have to do is just simply go to the marketplace, redeploy N2WS in your designated disaster recovery region, and it spins up and it's going to say, are you spinning up a brand new version or are you performing a disaster recovery? If I say no, it's a disaster recovery, it's actually going to find its own backup and offer to import that. That entire import process only takes about 30 seconds. So after about 90 seconds, you have the ability to completely recover your entire backup solution and your backend business. Then you can use that backup solution in your DR region or in your DR account to recover the rest of your mission critical instances.
Thanks for that answer. So for the next question, um, how can customers be able to protect their N2WS across or their instances across multiple regions or multiple accounts?
Oh, that's an interesting one as well, because, well, it is a web portal. And then I usually get the concern, well, how am I going to keep everybody else from using my web portal? Pretty simple. AWS provides great security groups which define exactly who's actually allowed to access this. So we don't require a public IP. You can actually use VPN tunneling. You can restrict that only your workstation is allowed to talk to N2WS. And of course, as I mentioned, we also support identity providers. So if you have a single sign-on solution, use your SAML-capable identity provider to then even use multi-factor authentication to authenticate to N2WS backup and recovery.
Oh, hey, we're not sure if you heard me. Asking Sebastian, what services are supported for what AWS services are supported for backup with N2WS?
Oh, yeah. So N2WS Backup and Recovery has the ability to back up EC2 instances, the volumes by themselves, or RDS, all of the different flavors, Aurora, Redshift, DynamoDB, and of course also the infrastructure settings I was talking about. So VPC settings, subnet, routing tables, and security groups as well.
Great, thank you very much for that. So I think that's all the time that we have for today. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and want to make sure to remind you to fill out your satisfaction survey at the end of the webinar, as we value your feedback. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And in addition, here are some links that you can use if you want to learn more about AWS Storage, N2WS, or DBSys Tel UK. Thank you.